As vaccine discussions continue across Virginia, schools say their focus isn't on the debate, it's on student safety. In Charlottesville and Albemarle County, a small number of families are requesting medical or religious exemptions, and people who work at the schools say they're closely tracking those numbers while protecting student privacy. Gabby Womack breaks down what the data shows and how schools balance choice with public health.
While vaccine debates often grab attention, the conversation can also look a little different for others. In both Charlottesville and Albemarle County, there are families requesting religious or medical exemptions, even as questions around vaccines continue. Both schools say it's a priority, always looking out for the students' well-being.
In a circumstance where a student can't be administered a vaccination per their doctor's orders, we get medical exemptions. A religious exemption is when a family disagrees with vaccination due to their personal beliefs, but those are submitted to us in the same way.
Those exemptions are a part of how school divisions across Central Virginia track student health. And 29 News found the numbers are still relatively low, even as conversations around vaccines continue statewide. In Charlottesville city schools, religious and medical exemptions combined have ticked up slightly over the last 3 years, from 1.7% in 2022 to 1.9% in 2023 and 2% in 2024. But Raznick says the goal has never changed, protecting students who do not have a choice.
One of the reasons vaccinations are so important is that there are always going to be people who can't be vaccinated. So we want as many people who can be vaccinated to have that protection for the people who can't.
Raznick says those records are kept carefully but privately and never used to separate students.
We wouldn't divulge to the family, to other families, anyone else's vaccination status. We don't use it for class selection. We don't really factor it into how we make decisions on where students attend school or what classes they attend in.
In Albemarle County, the numbers look similar, with 266 students claiming a religious exemption form and 16 medically exempt from one or more required vaccine this school year. That's grades K, 7, and 12. One communications officer says those requests appear to be slowing.
The number of exemptions that are being requested seem to be going down, but again, we can't comment specifically to what each of those exemptions might be.
Grant says families do have a choice, but schools are also clear about what's required to enroll.
When it comes to vaccines, obviously there's opportunities for parents to make those decisions that they need as it relates to religious exemptions. We have a list of vaccinations that are required for registration.
Gabby Womack, 29 News.